Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill. The South Carolina Gamecocks went to Indianapolis and really just took over the NFL Combine. Why are we talking about the NFL Combine Sunday morning in early March as it pertains to South Carolina? Because this matters, at least to me, in terms of where this program is going. They had 11 invitees to the NFL Combine this year. And that's not even including Debo Williams and Alex Huntley, who didn't even get invited. And they sure should have. South Carolina, are we seeing them kind of change the narrative a little bit and kind of being a college football program that puts out NFL draft picks? Because that matters. You know, in this landscape of recruiting, everybody's going to talk about NIL. And we're not going to get up here and say NIL does not matter. And we know South Carolina is very competitive when it comes to NIL. Still, NFL development matters a lot too. You listen to all of these kids at the high school ranks and say, hey, what are you looking for in a college football program that you want to go play for? They all talk about NFL development. This was a huge talking point for Michigan. You know, look at Michigan, what they're doing on the recruiting trail versus 5 years ago. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was Michigan putting out 12-plus guys to the NFL draft the last 2 years is playing a role in the success that Michigan's having on the recruiting trail. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is South Carolina has never been that program that you look at and say they're going to pump out NFL draft picks. Are we seeing that kind of shift? I want to have two separate conversations. One, I want to talk about the standouts of the combine for South Carolina, of which there were many. But I also want to look at next year's depth chart, next year's roster, and say, hey, how many potential NFL guys do we have on this roster going into 2025 as well? Because if you can start to stack these NFL classes of potentially 10-plus guys, that's going to mean something for South Carolina on the recruiting trail. Because, look, they got boxes checked. It's one of the best fan bases that you see in the country. Shane Beamer is one of those coaches that I just kind of have on. I got a running list of coaches that I'd suit up and go play for. Shane Beamer's one of them. They got a lot of boxes checked. And if they can get that NFL draft development box checked, that's massive for where South Carolina is trying to go over the next couple of years. Though they're one of those teams that's ascending. How high can they get? That's going to be the fun conversation. You continue to pump out NFL talent. The sky's the limit for this program. Want to get into it before we do it, as always. So the South Carolina fans, would love to hear how you guys are feeling about the NFL Combine performance. But I think more importantly, Dill, we're going to get into looking at this roster and saying, hey, how much NFL talent do we have going into 2025? There's a lot of potential names. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I'll just kick it off to you. The most impressive combine performance for South Carolina. I don't think this is going to be that hard of a question for you to start with. Who you got for us?
And it's clearly Nick Emmanwori. And I think I look at what they did with the combine and who went. One thing I kind of look at, I think you have a good mix of guys from the portal who came into South Carolina and really elevated themselves. Like I look at Kyle Kennard, I wouldn't have thought he would have been a day 2 pick a year ago when he was coming out of Georgia Tech. I was like, oh, good, solid, heavy pass rusher who, again, not elite twitch, not elite pass rush ability probably, but plays the run well. And then you look at like what he did at South Carolina. He's elevated himself to possibly day 1 pick. Certainly, I think he'll be minimum day 2. And then you look at other guys like Nick Emmanwori, develop him out of high school, make him a really good player. He'll probably be a first-round pick. TJ Sanders, that type of guy, Tonka Hemingway, like guys who you take from high school, but also like having a recipe for portal guys who can come in and immediately elevate themselves.
Joshua Simon's a guy that I put on that list too. Had a great NFL combine. He's going to be an NFL draft pick as well. I'm kind of with you because that matters. You're seeing Miami use the heck out of that with Cam Ward. Hey, Cam Ward came to Miami, went from a 4th-round draft pick to the number 1 overall pick. Well, then they go out and get Carson back the next year. When you show the ability to take a talented player in the transfer portal and say, hey, come spend 12 or 24 months with our program and get elevated, it helps when you're selling guys to come to your program out of the transfer portal as well. I like that idea.
Because you want the recipe for both. Like, I don't think you want to just be Ole Miss where you're not really developing a ton of high school talent and putting them into the draft. But you also don't want to be like Clemson where you don't show any path for portal guys to make impacts. Like I think you want to be a team that, again, will base what you do off of guys like Nick Emmanwori and TJ Sanders and Connor
Yes.
Hemingway and Josh Simon. But you also want to be able to attract a Kyle Kennard when you need to do it. Because, like, again, you look at what he did for that program this year. He probably did account for a win or two just by himself.
Yeah.
Like, he had a really good year for himself.
Yeah, Joshua Simon, he come from Western Kentucky, I believe, and came in. Joshua Simon was one of the best tight ends in the country last year. Nick Emmanwori, can we just go over these numbers real quick? I mean, we're talking a 4.38 40, number 2. And keep in mind, all of these metrics are as Nick Emmanwori being the biggest safety at the combine. He's 6'3", 220 pounds. He could play off-ball linebacker if you wanted to. 4.38 40 with a 1.4 9 10-yard split, which was by far number 1 amongst the safeties. A 43-inch vert, probably could play hoops if you wanted to. We haven't seen a guy put those kind of numbers out in a really long time, just historically in the NFL Combine. He was a homegrown guy. I mean, you spent 3 years, and that kind of speaks to what South Carolina is doing, developing athletes too. That's really exciting deal. To kind of put it into perspective here, South Carolina had 11 invitees to the NFL Combine. And again, not including Debo Williams, not including Alex Hunley, absolute snubs. The last time they had over six was in 2013. So they've pretty much they just doubled their historic number that they're putting out to the NFL Combine. That kind of tells you where this program's going. Let's take a look at this roster. This is the fun conversation for me, at least. When you look at the offensive side of the football, and you can feel free to throw in some underclassmen too that are going to need another year before they can go to the NFL Combine. You're seeing a ton of NFL talent. Dill, if I were to ask you, like, who are you looking at in terms of NFL draft picks next year, where are you going here?
I mean, obviously, if Lenoris has a really good season, he could be a top 5 pick. Like, he has a unique talent that, again, like, you look at what Cam Newton brought to the Panthers when he played there. Like, and being able to combine them both. And his passing attack did come along in a way that I think makes you think, like, yeah, NFL teams will love that. It's just not a college skill set, if you will, like certain guys.
What excites me the most is, like, how great could that be for the South Carolina program to have a guy that potentially could be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft in 2026? Because I don't think that's that crazy to say. We saw the North Sellers just get better and better in 2024. Takes another step in 2025. There will be NFL teams that are salivating over having a guy like Lenore Sellers be your franchise quarterback. Well, suddenly, what does that mean for South Carolina, not only on the recruiting trail, but specifically for quarterbacks? Where I know there's a lot of South Carolina fans that are maybe hoping he stays around for 2026. But if you're a South Carolina fan, you're almost hoping that he goes to the NFL draft, because that means if he's going to the NFL draft, he's probably going to be a top 5 pick in that draft. And that can change how this South Carolina team can recruit quarterbacks. And we're already starting to see it. I mean, South Carolina's well in it. They were in it for Jared Curtis, not in it for it anymore. But when's the last time South Carolina's been in it for 3 top 10 quarterbacks in a recruiting class? Almost never. And you have a guy in Aaron Noland who I think can play as kind of the future of this South Carolina offense. Rasul Faison certainly could be a guy that, I mean, coming from Utah State, elevates his style. He could be a top 100 pick in the NFL draft next year. Nick Harbor is probably the most intriguing, and that's another one where you're trying to, there's a very real scenario where we're talking Nick Harbor as a first-round NFL draft pick too. He's a guy that the light bulb's starting to flicker on. We all know he's going to burn up the 40-yard dash whenever he goes to the NFL Combine. That's what excites me the most. And then, Dill, you look at the offensive line. Look, Josiah Thompson can't go to the NFL draft after next year. Make no mistake about it. I think he is well on his way to being a first-round NFL draft pick. You look at a guy like Tree. That's a guy that has massive NFL draft potential. Cam Pringle would probably throw into that mix as well. Michael Smith at tight end, probably he needs another year, obviously, before he can go. There's 6, 7, 8 guys that, whether they go or not next year, are certainly NFL talent on the offensive side of the football. Am I forgetting anybody?
No, and I think you kind of look at what is more exciting is, like, now you're starting to see, like, Josiah Thompson, again, and Lenore Sellers, like, those guys feel like almost if they were going now, especially the way Josiah Thompson was playing towards the end of the year, like, those feel like not just, like, fringe first-round picks or day 2 picks, but, like, you're looking at guys who are, again, legitimately, like, top 10 level play. Like, Josiah Thompson, like, That's
When's the
unique
last time
athletics.
South Carolina's had a top 10 NFL draft pick?
It's probably was it Clowney? I'm trying to think. Obviously, Clowney came out; he was a monster, but
I'm trying to
it
think.
feels like it's been forever.
South Carolina fans, help the boys out real quick. Boys should have done our research on that before we hopped on. But I was kind of thinking, when's the last time we've had? I mean, you've had a guy like Xavier Legette go in the first round, but top 10 pick is kind of different. And you're right, like
And
Lenore
you
Sellers.
probably you got two that you think of right now on the offense side of the ball, and then you flip over to defense and you see Dylan Stewart. I don't see a world that he's not going top 5. He'd probably go top 5 right now if he was coming out this year.
I think there's a very good chance if Dylan Stewart entered the NFL draft this year after his freshman year, he'd probably go top 10. I don't think that's all that crazy to say. And then you look throughout the list and say, all right, I mean, Jalen Kilgore and Judge, they're going to do. Brandon Sissy's a guy that can go to the NFL. I know this is a projection here, but there are some, and it's kind of funny that we're having this conversation because what's the biggest question mark we have about South Carolina is probably the off-ball linebackers. But at the same time, you have guys like Fred Johnson and Justin Owen. What I'm hearing from Donovan Darden from the winter workouts as a true freshman, they're not necessarily proven, but you talk about NFL caliber bodies, NFL caliber potential. You got 3 or 4 guys in that linebacker room that probably have that as well. That's what excites me the most.
Frankly, back in the day, you didn't think I don't know, as a outsider, you didn't think much okay, South Carolina, yeah, they're going to get their talent into the door. It's a big program, historic program, all those things. But they weren't a team you ever felt comfortable okay, Fred Johnson's going to need some development to be that kind of guy. You saw him play obviously a little bit last year. Looks good in space. Is he good enough in the box? Does he play physical enough? Those certainly are questions you still kind of have about his game. But I think you feel a little bit more comfortable with the way Beamer's been running things. That again, those guys have been making a lot more progress than they had been.
There's one thing that Beamer has prioritized, and we're seeing a couple programs do this. I think Matt Rule is doing it at Nebraska too. We are going to prioritize play. This is kind of how we talked about Lenore Sellers coming out of high school too. We are prioritizing guys that, okay, maybe was Lenore Sellers the best football player as a senior coming out of high school? No, at the quarterback spot, he was a project. But you look at him and say, if it works out, that's an NFL caliber dude, and it's clearly starting to work out. Shane Beamer's been prioritizing top end NFL athleticism. And he's saying, hey, give us all the good athletes, and we're going to do our best to make them good football players. And at the end of the day, I love it, Dill. At the rudimentary idea of football, height, weight, speed. If you have bigger, faster, stronger players, you're probably going to have pretty damn good football teams. That's what Shane Beamer's doing. A lot of these guys might be 3 stars coming out of high school, but are freaky athletes. You prioritize and you stack enough of those kind of bodies, and then you pair it up with the player development that we're clearly seeing with South Carolina. That's the recipe. That's the recipe. And as you continue to put guys to the NFL draft, it's going to be easier and easier to get those guys to come to your program. That's what stands out to me. Why are we talking about the NFL Combine? We didn't want to just get up here and talk about the guy South Carolina is losing. Wanted to talk about in the landscape of, or in the scope of, look, if this program stacks NFL draft classes like they're doing right now, you are going to see it become easier and easier for South Carolina to attract talent at the high school ranks. That is how you ascend as a football program. That's what Shane Beamer is trying to do. We'll close out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it, Dill. I think we forgot some guys to probably point out, but we'll certainly be talking about those guys over the next couple months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.